And Bakkies looked at me and said, "Did you get him?" I said, "Yeah, not really." So the next scrum, and as we want to back down, he taps me and said, "Victor, swap." And luckily, I think it was our ball, so it's all right, or their ball, so it's all right if we change around. So I change around. He's on this side now. I can see John looks down and it's like, "Boys, what now?" I said, "Don't worry." But John knew what's coming. So as we hit him, he knew after the ball, so I was just pull it, and Bakkies hit him, but he hit him a good one. And it's just blood all over.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode on the Lessons from the Game podcast. And today we are joined by a titan of rugby, Victor Matfield, with 127 Springbok caps, the 2007 World Cup title, and a legendary lock partnership with Bakkies Botha. Victor helped lead South Africa to greatness. He was also the heartbeat of the Bulls during the golden era, winning 3 Super Rugby titles and redefining line-out play. From Springbok locker room to boardroom, this is a masterclass in leadership, legacy, and what it takes to dominate the game and life. Victor, how are you doing, brother? Good to see you.
Hi, G. Very nice to speak to you. Those things were years ago, but still sounds good. And I still miss those Bulls years. We had some fun times.
The good old days, the good old days. Ben, brother, good to see you, man. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm well, thanks, G. What about you, mate? You okay?
Nah, great, man. Great. Just a bit of rush. Coach the academy team, so running a bit all over the place. Hectic day, Tuesday, scrum session, loads of meetings, and you prep 2 hours for 3 minutes in presenting in your video session. But that's all good. Victor knows all about that. But yeah, super excited, Matty, to have you here. Great to see you. That's the great thing about podcasting, touching base with former teammates and friends. But Victor, you touch base, the good old days. The Bulls dynasty, the golden era. All right. I even noticed they've taken off our pictures and everything. They're trying to erase us, but we're eternal. They can't. Victor, we've had some great memories back in the day with the Bulls, and there are various reasons why we were that successful. But if we have to go back to 2007, that massive year, the first time we won the Super Rugby, is there anything that you can share with us from back then that stood out, that helped us to win that first trophy? Today's Lessons from the Game episode was possible thanks to the support of Harris Begley Financial Planning, headed up by former Blackheath player Matt Begley. They are the experts to speak to for tailored advice on investments, mortgages, insurance, and pensions, helping you plan for a future of financial security. So when you think money, think Harris Begley and head to www.harrisbegley.co.uk. Approver Quilter Financial Services Limited and Quilter Mortgage Planning Limited, March 2025.
Yeah, I think it all started much earlier, G. I think in 2001, Heineke Meyer got to the Bulls. He had a dream. I still remember, I don't know, I think you joined us a bit later. I was one of the fortunate guys that were there from the start with Heineke Meyer. He took us away on this camp and he asked us, "Listen, what's our dream?" And at that stage, the Bulls were really struggling. We were at the bottom of the lock in Super Rugby. They were struggling to even stay in the Currie Cup at that stage. And I mean, we all had dreams and we were like, yes, maybe we can get to a Currie Cup final or maybe even win a Currie Cup final in a few years' time. And that was what the players were thinking. And then Heineke, or you got to know him very well later on, he said, no, he wants to be the best team in the world. And we were all like, wow, that's a bit of a big dream. I mean, at that stage, we couldn't think of winning a Super Rugby. I mean, no South African team got close to it. We struggled. The Sharks maybe now and then got to a semi-final, but for the Bulls, we really struggled at the bottom of the lot. And then I think things started to happen. And the first year, of course, we lost 11 out of 11 games. He got fired, went down to the Vodacom Bulls. And I think that was actually a blessing because he went down to the Vodacom Cup. That was a level below for the people that don't know. And he actually got a lot of youngsters into that Vodacom squad. I think maybe you were part of it, Fourie Priya, a young squad. And they started winning Vodacom Cup. Then they came up to Currie Cup. Then we started winning Currie Cups. And then I think after winning 2 Currie Cups, we got to 2007, where we really had this team together. And Heineken always said it. If you want to win Super Rugby, you need to have 2, 3 guys that would walk into a world team. You need 5, 6 guys that's in the Springbok team with a lot of experience. So we had all of those things there. We had belief in that team. But we had to go the extra mile. We had to go work harder. And I don't know if you remember the blue blood that we brought in at the end of the sessions in George. And I remember us having the hardest off season ever. And the nice thing as well, with 2007, a lot of our Blue Bulls players that were playing for the Springboks got rested for the end of year tour. So we were able to actually have a full preseason with the Bulls team in 2007 as well. So we had this fantastic off season, very hard. I remember before we went on the break, Heineken gave us those training plan for the 2 weeks that we had off. And on that, remember on the Christmas day, there was a 5K run. And I was like, Heineken, didn't you have this wrong? Are you sure this is right? Didn't you get your dates wrong? And I don't know if you remember, he asked the players, listen, guys, do you think we had the hardest off season of any of the other teams? And we said, yeah, definitely we had. And he asked, do you think there's other teams that think they did the hardest off season? And we said, yeah, they might be, but they definitely didn't train as hard as us. And then he said, listen, you know what? If you go out and run on Christmas Day and you do that 5K, we definitely will be ahead of any other team by 5Ks. That I can promise you. And I definitely went out and I did that 5K run on Christmas Day. And like you know, yes, there's a lot of other things that happened that season and we can maybe talk about it. But we won that Super Rugby final in the 83rd minute, Brian coming back in, scoring after the Hooter. And I don't know, was it that 5K run that most of the guys did on Christmas Day? Or was it just by accident? But for me, nothing is by accident. And it's just because, yes, we've built something for 6 years. We had that big dream that we were chasing. It took us little steps. We had to do a lot of hard work that we didn't see paying off immediately. But I think we built something nice. But then that year, we just went the extra yard. We went further than anyone else. And then, yeah, we got the result at the end.
Yeah, mate, I think it comes down to, you just mentioned that word belief. We really believed it. We really wanted to become the best team in the world. And I remember those video sessions. I used to hate breakfast in George because we were in the hostel, and that meant that was the start of pain. We were going to experience pain. So I used to hate breakfast because I knew it was just like an hour. There was the video, and then we had to get going. And I had Basil as well on the pod. We're going to share his episode later. And we spoke about that day at George. I think we did 4 beep tests or bleep tests back in the day. We just said, keep on going. And I think Heineken knew how to push us, but he also had that players. We had a great group of players. You know, there's so many good players, and everybody was committed. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we achieved well. But Matty, you know, the big thing I want to ask you is like, remember back in the day, you're talking about the blue blood. We used to have the blue blood, but then eventually those blocks kind of stopped. But then you started running after training. It was yourself and Fourie. And then I remember you always used to look to our side, right, G? Let's go. And what was the reason? Because we kept that became our thing after training. Why did you continue to take lead of that, of those little small blue blood blocks after training?
Yeah, I think, you know, as we got older, there was a lot of talk about player driven. And I think a lot of the time you get the players that said, listen, coach, we need to cut this. This is too long. And we had days like that as well, where we would go to a Heineken or maybe even later with Frans Ludik and say, listen, Frans, the guys are done. We need to have a break. But there was also days where we could feel, it's not enough. We need to go. We didn't do enough. And we can feel we weren't as the guys are now with heart monitors and you know exactly what your heart rate was. You could feel it. You could feel this session wasn't hard enough and we needed more. And I think as the leaders of the team, you wanted to be in front. And if you feel we didn't have enough, let's go. Let's do it. Because that's what worked for us. That's what brought us here. I still fight with a lot of the places where I coach now, where they want Monday just to be a recovery day. I said, listen, we won a lot of trophies where Monday was the hardest day. We'd get back after Saturday, we would have a big Saturday. some of G's squad will on a Sunday have a hard Sunday as well, partying. But Monday was the hard days. We would go out and we would push each other for what, hour and a half, 2 hours on a Monday afternoon, Holy Bowl or certain games where we had to run quite a bit. So for me, it was all about knowing I was ready for a Saturday. And for me, and I think it's a culture as well. And with the Bulls, we had it. We needed a hard culture. We didn't enjoy a soft culture. And yeah, if it wasn't there in a training, we had to create it for ourselves as a group of players as well. So I think if you want to be player driven, yes, you can have input where you want something nice for the team, but you must always also be able to say, listen, this wasn't enough. We need to go more.
You know, I always tell the players, you know, back in the day after a game, I didn't need compliments. All I wanted was just to get 2 nods. And that was from yourself and from Bucky's Butter. That's all I needed. If you just gave that, I used to do that little wing. Gee, that's it. That's all I needed, you know. It was about that respect, that mutual respect. But you're coming back to Heineke. Heineke, he was a great storyteller. Is there any stories that you can remember from back in the day that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, I think a nice one. You talked about belief. So we talked about the winning of the 2007. But if you remember right, the week before the semi-finals, we played the Reds at Loftus. And I remember watching the Blues playing the Crusaders on the Friday. And I think we needed the Blues to win. And then we would have been second or something on the log. But then the Crusaders won. And we were in a position where if we win the game with a bonus point, I think we would have been third. And if we win it without the bonus point, we would have been fourth. So if we're third, we would have gone away. We would have to go play Crusaders away in Christchurch. But fourth, we would only need to play the Sharks, and then the Blues would play the Crusaders again. And for myself, I was lying there after the game, and I said, yes, how am I going to tell the players, listen, let's win against the Reds, but we can't get a bonus points because we don't want to go to the Crusaders. We'd rather play the Sharks in Durban, and hopefully the Blues can beat the Crusaders, and then we can get a home semi-final. And remember walking out at captain's practice, and I could see Heineke coming over to me, and I'm like, and you know Heineke, when he got really excited, he had this little white when he spit on the side of his mouth, and he had this spit. I'm like, yeah, what's happening? Coach, this is going to be difficult. How are we going? What do you mean? I said, what did coach mean? He said, I've worked it out. We need to beat them by a bonus point, and we need to score more than 72 points. I said, coach, 72 points. This is Super Rugby. This isn't Currie Cup or something. We're playing the Reds. Eddie Jones has been telling the whole world he knows how to beat the Bulls. He watched us. Now he wants 72 points. And he said, I believe it. And we walked into the change room, and that's always on a Friday and a Saturday, there was a story. And he told us a story about the guys that went praying in Durban for rain. It was really dry in South Africa. And there was a little boy that went with his dad. And as the guys was praying, this guy asked his dad, the little boy, listen, Dad, why doesn't anyone have umbrellas here? And the dad says, but why? He said, but we're praying for rain. It's going to rain now. And that was just a story of Heineke telling us, listen, if we say we're going to do something, we need to believe in it. And if we tell each other, yeah, we're going to go for 72 points, then we need to believe we're going to beat them by 70 points. And we were all, okay, we're in. And then he said, okay, but this is how we're going to do it. Brian Abana, I need you to score 3 tries. Akona, I need you to do this. The back of forwards, we need 4 mauling tries. We need to defend like this. And he put the whole thing out, and he said the only other thing is we won't be able to walk back when we score tries. Sometimes Morne, if it's in front, you'll have to drop kick, and we need to run back. And we did all of that, and at the end of the day, I think, can you remember? I think the score was 93 or 96-3. So we smashed that 72 points, biggest margin in Super Rugby, and that's just because the guys brought the umbrella. They believed 100% we're going to do it. And we went on that pitch knowing we're going to do it. Not thinking, we knew we're going to do it.
Incredible. I remember reading about that actually, Victor. We and G and I have spoken about it a couple of times, and the story I've heard is like, who's going to give me another try? Yeah, okay, you know, and everybody chip in, and it's incredible. But the question I have is, Heineke, where did that come from? His belief and his confidence and his storytelling. To come up with that, like you said, to say we're going to score like 65 plus points or whatever in Super Rugby, it was unheard of. Where did he get that from? Do you know?
Well, and that's what I say. I think people start dreaming big, and I mean that's where he started. Listen, we want to win. We want to be the best provincial team in the world or club team. And I mean, doesn't just happen. I mean, that first year we went out 11 out of 11, we lost. We went back that same year to Currie Cup, and we had to look at ourselves and say, listen, what small victories can we get? What's the small things that we need to adapt to? So fitness was one of them. Game plan. So we wanted to play that first year. We wanted to play like the Brumbies, throw the ball around and said, listen, we don't have the skill yet to do that. So we need to go back to conservative. We need to get a great kicking game. We need a pack of forwards that can dominate and we can't make mistakes. So that was the game plan. We went into a Currie Cup final. There's only one play. We played to the 112 cents. We had two big centers, run it up. Next ruck, big center, run it up. And if you get momentum, the forwards will come around the corner and play. If we don't, we kick the ball. Doesn't matter where we are. And we won the Currie Cup like that. And as we got better, we developed stuff. And then I remember in 2006 in Super Rugby as well, of in Currie Cup, we had to beat the Stormers by 33 points to get into a semi-final. So that was the first time. Then Heineke Meyer wrote on the board, and that was in Cape Town. So normally we struggle to beat the Stormers. He wrote 33 on the board on Captain's Day. He said, this is what we must beat. And again, the same as with the next year with the Reds, this is how we're going to do it. What did we beat the Stormers by? In Cape Town, 33 points, exactly. So then you start creating belief, and the players start believing in each other. I mean, I came back after the 2 years retirement. And you have to have the players that buy in, because it's not just on the field, but on training field, pushing yourself further than you think you can go. I mean, Basil pushed us where we think there's no chance we can do it. Don't know if you remember those 40, 100 meters we had to do in block of 8. The first time we did it, I think we couldn't do 6 where you get to like within 18 seconds and then 12 seconds rest or whatever, or 20 seconds 10. And at some stage, we got to the 40, I mean, 3 times 8 and extras or whatever. We got to that, and we never thought we could. So that starts giving you belief. So, and then you start believing in each other and coming back from certain things in certain games. And I mean, then when you get to a Super Rugby final, you're down and out. They've got a kick to win the game. And I can tell them, Bob, guys, if he misses this kick, we're going to score. You know it. We just need to keep on hold of the ball. And the guys believe it because we've done so many things together. 2 years later, after I retired, came back, I was in a team, a new team, youngsters. Same thing, captain. I think I'm brave, but I didn't have the same players around me. So I could tell a story, I can motivate, and let's do it. But the reaction, the eyes just went dull. There was nothing back. So you have to build a team together. Small victories, working hard on the field, achieving stuff that you don't think you will be able to first on the practice field, then in games. Then you start believing in each other, you start believing in the coach, and then you start believing that this team can achieve anything that they set their mind to. So it's all about those small victories.
That's beautiful. It's a great lesson for us, G. When we talk about lessons from the game, that's a transferable thing that we see in the workplace, isn't it? When we speak to other people and they talk about transferable skills and things, that it's a great reminder, how to build that team in whatever environment people are in.
I think
can I come in here? So I remember as well. So I got sent back, and that's something you can use in business, in sport, and anything. I got sent back from the Springboks. Jake White and myself had a little disagreement. He said I was injured. I said I wasn't injured. He still sent me back because he said I was injured. And I wanted to prove a point. And so that same Saturday when they played the test, I played for the Bulls on the Saturday. So Heineke backed me and said, okay, Victor, if you say you're ready, I'm playing you. Of course I'll play you. So I played in the game. So Heineke had a plan with us. When we get 5 meters from the line, a certain mall, front of the line out, this is what we're going to do. So I get in the game. So I can, if you ask G, I could go into the back of the line, I can win the ball. So I go into the back, always a better ball to drive off if you can win the back ball. Call it on myself, it's open, Gary throws it over. Next line out again, walk in, I see they contesting in front, back is on, call it, Gary throws it over. Next moment, number 5 comes off, I'm off the field. So I'm coming after the game, I said, Heineke, but why did you pull me off? He said, because you didn't make the right calls. I said, but I did. It was open at the back, and Gary missed it. You should take Gary off because he missed it. I made the right call. He said, no, Victor, I told you we want to start in the front. We want to build something. And if all 15 guys can't do something perfectly right, then you do something that's not as difficult. And I think that's a lesson that I took from that day. If you coach as well, it's nice to have this great plan, what you wanted to do. And if all 15 can't execute it 100%, rather take a step back, do something easier, but make sure everyone can do it and they believe in what you're doing before you go to something else. And that's the same with our game plan. Gee, if you remember in the beginning, very conservative. At the end, 2019, we played the most expensive game, I think, in the 2010 Super Rugby final. In the first half, we didn't kick the ball once. We just held it in hand. But we built, and we could do it by then. In the beginning, we couldn't do it. We didn't have the skill set, and we didn't have decision makers that can make the right decision in that game plan.
You know, Victor, it comes that it's 100% spot on. Like Heineke was very tough on us about that. You needed to do your job, but that's what it comes down to. And also we had that respect in the team. You know, when I just arrived at the Bulls, you know, obviously I was looking forward to, and I'll be honest with you, Maddie, when I got there, it was tough because the bond was already tight amongst you guys, and coming in like an outsider, and there was a stage I was this close to leaving, and because I didn't feel a part of a team, I just played for the Boks, and I was playing Vodacom Cup, I was involved in Super Rugby, but luckily Gary Botha pulled me aside, and he just said to me in Afrikaans, "Gee, byt vas. Just be patient. When you get an opportunity and when you're ready, you will see what happens." And I'm so grateful because if we look at the Bulls team today, or back then, we're still in contact. Our WhatsApp groups are still going, but we were driven by giving our best, not just for the team, but for our teammates. I didn't want to disappoint Buckies. Buckies didn't want to disappoint me. Gary, the same. Pedri, the same. This bond. We were driven by something bigger. We really did want to become the best team and club team in the world. And that was the key for us. And I think I'm just grateful to have been part of it, Ben. It was like the amount of players, we were relentless. Everybody was doing their job. You know, Victor was hard on us. If you had a shit lift in the lineouts, he would call out. And if the hooker didn't throw straight, he would call out. We were very meticulous. But Victor, coming onto that, just to transition a bit into the lineout area, you were probably the best of your era. And I still reference you to players that I'm working with in our team as well. Just your work ethic. What was the secret, if you can give some insight in terms of your ability to develop the skill of becoming a great lineout caller, but also having that ability to reading defense? Because I spoke to Ali Williams, by the way, the other day. He sends his regards. So if you can maybe just give us some insights in terms of your philosophy and how you went about it when you were still a player.
Well, I think it started off as just spending more time than anyone else analyzing lineups and looking at lineups and trying to understand lineups. And the more you look at it, the more you start seeing things. And I will always go to guys when I try and help them and say, listen, if you go into a game, you need to have a plan. You must know exactly on your own ball, you must know exactly how they're going to contest. If you know how they're going to contest, are they in a pot system? Are they doing man watch? But then if you know that, you must know what works against that. If he doesn't know, you know what they're doing, and you don't understand what's the counter for that. So you must understand if they're in pot system, there's always a space open. So you must have a quick calling system. If you're up against this team that's got a pot and they move late in a thing, you must have an option call where you go in, wait for them to move, and you take the other option. if you have against a man-watch system, there's other things that on. Then action always beats reaction. Then a throw jump, depends where the guy is looking. Then a certain throw jump will work better. So it's all about knowing exactly what you're up against and then having a plan how to beat that. But the one thing that I see, so I was with Japan now last year. So both times that we were there, we played New Zealand and we played England. So I could help them with a plan, but also in the game, if I see things start changing, I can send through, listen, they're changing this, so have a look at this. But the moment I weren't there, so the plan was there, I can send it through, then they change something in the game, then the players don't know how to adapt. So you have to teach your players to understand what works against what. So if you have a certain plan, and now all of a sudden the picture that you thought you'll see has changed, you must be able to adapt and you must understand what to do against a different system. So I would say, firstly, you need to do all the hard work. You need to spend hours and hours analyzing lineouts, and then you need to get your own game plan. You need to get your own way of how you want to run a lineout. But you must understand it as well. And the more you look at lineouts, the better it will be. And then defensively as well, same thing. What do teams do? Do they do certain things in certain areas? Is there certain giveaways in a lineout? I mean, there's now, I can tell you some of the top teams in the world, some of their front locks. They will look down at the feet. The moment there's a throw jump, all of a sudden they will look at the hooker. And still, the guys don't do their work and pick it up. I promise you, I can pick it up immediately. By this to say, if I look at a game 2 or 3 times, it's, okay, this guy will give it away in a game. The moment he looks somewhere else, I can say what ball is coming. So if you're a defender, even if he looks down, you know this can't be a throw jump. And if there's not a throw jump, then I don't have to have a look at the ball, because then he can't beat me. Then I can just look at what they're doing. So it's all those little things that you must understand, but then you need to do the hard work to analyze it and pick it up with looking at a lot of videos before a game.
Victor, when did you first realize that was going to be a super strength for you as a skill? At what age? Or, and then the second part of that question is, like, how long do you think it took you to suddenly go, I think I'm mastering this craft now. I think I'm getting this now.
Yeah, so I think I was lucky at under 20 level. So when I would play, I played under 20. It was like either the hooker or the scrum half will call where you want to throw in the line out. And then we had to call back. Do we want the quick ball, straight up ball, 2 steps back? So on a 21 level, that was the only options I had. So my scrum half or hooker who made the calls knew I was his best option. So he threw quite a bit on me. So I just had to understand when is a quick ball, when is a straight up, or when is a lob the best ball. So that I got right somehow. And then I was very lucky. Then I got signed to go play in Griquas. And Swayze the Brain, who was the attack coach, was Rassie Erasmus as well, the attack guru. He came to me and he coached against me for Natal under 21s. And he said, when he signed me with Griquas, he said, Victor, you know what I think of you. That's why I got you. I want you to take control of the lineouts. And I think back then it didn't work. And he said, you can go to the lineout. And he actually started off. So I didn't have a plan. He said, take a 4-man. You're on the outside. You just run in wherever you want to be. So that's how it started. And then it started to become, this is easy. If I do this, this is easy. And then I started calling the line out, all the moves and where the ball is going. So no one is calling back. I call all the movement in the line out and where we throw because I'm doing all the analyzing and I know what to do. And the funny thing is, when I got picked for the Springboks the first time, my first line out training, Andre Markgraaff was also involved with Griquas. He was the forwards coach of the Springboks. So now I arrive at this first training session. There's Andre Venter, Rassie Erasmus, Mark Andrews, all of them around about 50 test matches or more. And Andre Markgraaff called me over and said, listen, Victor, just show these guys how you run the line out so we can adapt to the Springboks. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm the first guy time, yeah, I'll just do what they want. Now I want you to show them. I think from there on, whenever I played, we started adjusting towards my plan. And once I took over from Mark Andrews, we went completely the way I did lineouts. And yeah, now these days, everyone is doing that way.
Wow.
Victor, I think the big question I have for you regarding the lineouts, I'm a scrum coach and I'm also looking to level up in different areas. Definitely not the running game, but coming back to the lineouts, when we were playing, a lot of the calls, don't laugh at me, Ben. when we used to call it, sometimes used to call it in the lineout. We used to have our codes. You just kept on going. We knew exactly what to do. We now see today where everybody's doing the huddle and then everybody's running in. There has become an issue with the time where players are delaying the game, slowing down the pace. What is the massive difference, do you think, now with the lineouts today compared to back then when we were still playing?
I don't think there's a big difference. So, like I said, I took Japan last year to our old system, and I think New Zealand is still doing it the way we did, calling it in the lineup. And I mean, I took Japan with 2 weeks working with them to the old system that we used to do. Almost had no options that that I always had 2, 3 options, and then quick calls with a color or whatever. And then if you need to make a dumb, you can have a longer call. And we won, I think, against New Zealand. We lost one. We stole 3 of these. Against England with Maro Toji, everyone playing, we lost one. We stole 4 of their balls. So I think it's like the world is. England started calling the line out outside with a huddle, then walking with 2, 3 options. And they also different than. So if you can remember right, we always had a, what do you call it, a bank of lineouts. So we would have on each lineout all else different movements. So we had like 50 calls. But of course, if we go into a game, I would tell you these are the options that should be on. But I can still pull out any of the other calls because we trained there on a Monday. We went through everything every week. So these days, because all the coaches are so hard on time, the guys can almost only have like 7 lineouts or 8 lineouts that they can do in a week. And that makes it difficult because it's all about the time that you have. We spent on a Monday, we had an hour session. Wednesday, we had an hour. And then we still had like morning on a Tuesday or something. Understand? So that's more than anyone else. So I think the system can still work like we did it. I still think it will be better than anyone else is doing at the moment. But it's all about, I don't know why, but everyone is just training less and there's less time on the feet and less time to do lineups. So I don't know if there's enough time for the guys to really drill in these things. And that's the same with contesting. I mean, you don't see teams really doing man watch or mirroring anymore. Because if you want to mirror in the lineout, you need to train it half an hour to an hour a week. The guys don't have time, so it's easier to just go pot system and just pick and go up wherever you want, or force people into a front or whatever.
It's fascinating. G, I was going to ask you, is that still the same in France, though? Or do they spend a bit more time and respect that area of the game a bit more still?
No, it's tight, man. We are constantly fighting to get more time on our split session. Even myself, I had to be creative. I once had a 3-minute scrum session. So it's just crouch, bind, set, and there you go. So, yeah, we have picked up in the modern. I agree with Victor. Time is an issue because it comes down a lot, especially in France. Our seasons are very long, so it comes down to load management, the management of players. Even you have some S&C coaches counting the amount of jumps players are doing in the session to help them with their knees. And I'm like, back in the day, we used to do like an hour line-out session. We knew our line-outs by heart. It was smooth. It was quick. And I see players constantly messing up the line-out moves because they don't got it. They don't understand it. And it comes down to what Victor said, repetition is key. And I think that's the most important thing. And it's tough when you have a little time. So what does that mean? More preparation. You got to do your homework. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these days they believe in all the walkthroughs. So it's all about the walkthroughs and spending time in slow motion, and that can work. But I mean, in a line-out drill, you want to get that rhythm, you want to get that feel going. So yeah, so I'm fighting constantly at Japan as well. I need more time, and they like to give it a block. So now 3 minutes, now 4 minutes, now it's not sorted. Just give me time to get this fixed, and then we'll come do the next thing. Yeah. time is an issue, so you have to work with it.
Matty, just to mix it up, I know you have spoken about this before. I always tell the story of Matt Stevens just before the World Cup, the English Test match. I remember he needed some makeup after the game. If you could give your version of that story and how things went down in that Test match before the World Cup.
Yeah, so John has been telling it all over. So Bucky's and myself were used to sorting out the hookers and tights when needed. I think about 3 weeks before that game, BJ Buerta played for the Sharks, and it was all the talk, about them going to scrum us to pieces. And well, he only lasted one scrum and he didn't come back. And then, I mean, we're playing against Matt Stevens, and in the week, Bucky's comes to me and says, Victor, I don't understand. We train at Loftus, we play at Loftus. Matt Stevens, boys high right across the street. How can he play for England? He's a South African boy. And I explained to him, listen, he went over to get opportunities, and now he's there for like 4 or 5 years. He's got residency. Now he's allowed to play. He's never played for South Africa. So now he can. But now Bucky's is like, he's got this look on his face. Said, no, he doesn't really understand this. He's a South African boy, but no, it's not right. So we go into the game, and as we run out, Bucky says, or before he said, we'll probably sort him out today. I said, Bucky's, yeah, we can try. Let's see what happens. So the first scrum, as we go down, I'm on the loose head side. At Matt Steven, he's on the tight head side. So as the scrum break up, first time I give him a shot, but not much. I miss him a little bit. It's just a little scrap, goes on. And Bucky's looked at me and said, did you get him? I said, yeah, not really. So in the next scrum, we get to the scrum. And as we want to back down, he taps me and said, Victor, swap. And luckily, I think it was our ball, so it's all right, or their ball, so it's all right if we change around. So I change around. He's on this side now. I can see John looks down and it's like, boys, what now? I said, don't worry. But John knew what's coming. So as we hit him, he knew after the ball, so I was just pull it, and Bucky's hit him, but he hit him a good one. And it's just blood all over. And as it goes up, Matt Stevens off the field, we go into the change room. Now John comes up to me and Bucky and said, listen, boys, that's enough. Matt's a lekker oak. We mates. You both tried your best. Bucky's, you had him a good one, but that's enough. And Bucky's is like, yeah. So we go, but we thought he's off the field. And as we run out, Matt Stevens strapping around the head, back on again. And we thought, okay, stop. The first scrum, go down again. Bucky steps and he said, swap. I said, okay. Now we know. As we go down, John Smith says, Manne, ek het met julle gepraat. So he said in Afrikaans, boys, I did talk to you. And Bucky's just looked at him and said, just one more cappy in Afrikaans. He went down, knocked him, and that was the end. Matt Stevens off for the rest of the game.
I remember speaking to Matt after the game. He said, I knew you guys were going to do something, but I didn't expect it every single scrum.
Yeah.
Oh, those were the good old days. Matty, this was a very tough podcast for us to prepare because you have so many great milestones. You've achieved so much. We'll talk in a bit about the World Cup in 2007. But is there anything you can share with our audience, our viewers, any setbacks or injuries that you experienced was really tough, where you found yourself in a really tough spot and you can share your process and your insights with us?
Yeah, firstly, I think I was really fortunate to never have really had a big injury. I think my longest out was probably 8 weeks. It was just before the 2007, probably about 6, 7 in the preseason, actually before the 2007 World Cup, where I torn my crucial ligaments, but not the front one, the back one, the anterior one or posterior one. And I had to decide, listen, am I going to operate on it or am I not going to operate on it? So I think injury-wise, I was very lucky. I think my biggest learning curve was probably, and I mean, I've been out there with my my relationship with Jake. It was really difficult. And I talked earlier about Jake sending me back for that game, and then I played that game. And I mean, after that, Jake came back, and Heineke actually said, "Listen, we need to sort this out. We can't keep doing this. Victor, there's something wrong." So he called Jake to come see himself and me at Loftus. And we sat down, and Heineke asked him, said, "Listen, Jake, I know you're very hard on Victor and you feel certain things, but Victor is the hardest worker. He's always on time. He's got respect for everything. And he's really someone that rugby means a lot to." And Jake said, yes, he knows that, but there's other things. Victor always wants to be the flashy one. He always wants to have all the attention. He drives the flashiest cars. His clothes he's wearing is always out there, like, gee, you will remember. And his hair is the longest. He's always funny beards and whatever. And he says, I can't work with it. I don't think he cares about the team. It's just about himself. And as I was sitting there, I was and almost getting cross at Jake. And I was listening to all of this, and Heineke was talking to him and said all the good things about me. And at the end of the day, I said, thanks, Jake and Heineke. And as Jake walked out, Heineke actually said to him, he said, Victor, you know some of these things are true. And I said, Heineke, what do you mean? He said, you do like to be flashy, to be out there, to be a bit different than anyone else. Is it always needed? And all of a sudden, when it came from someone like Heineke, who I thought was on my side, I knew I had to change. I knew I didn't have to change completely. I still had my longer hair, but I cut it a bit short. I still like certain things, but I went way out there. All of a sudden, I had to make sure that the team comes first, because there's a lot of times there is certain things. I mean, there is certain players that, take a Schalk Burger. He doesn't have to gym, but on a Saturday, he will tackle guys the hardest. But if he's the captain and he doesn't gym, most of the team won't gym, and then they won't be able to perform. And me as a leader of the Bulls, I can maybe go out on a Wednesday, have 8 brandy and cokes. Thursday morning, I'm the first guy in the gym, training hard. Saturday, I'm fine. But if everyone is doing it, then the culture will go bad. So I think for me, that was probably the biggest thing where I had to look at myself and say, listen, Victor, there's certain things, although I don't agree with certain things, I need to adapt, because the team is so much more important to me. And the things I do must have a positive influence on the team. Although it's not a negative for me, it can be negative on the team. So I need to adapt. So everything I do is positive for the team. And I think for me, that was probably the biggest. And like I said, there wasn't really, maybe early in the career, I was dropped maybe once, or maybe, once by Rudolph Charlie for a week or two. But I didn't have a big setback or a big injury that I can say, yo, I was out for so long and I had to work that hard to come back.
That takes a lot of humility, though, Victor, doesn't it? You know, today we talk about a growth mindset. You know, it's fashionable to talk about having a growth mindset. That's displaying a growth mindset right there. You know, and having that ability to be self-aware.
Yeah, I think you have to. I mean, you have to know yourself, and you have to know the team. So, I mean, as you get older as well, and even as a leader. So probably one of my worst things when I was a young leader is I didn't know the young guys in the team. Also, what G said, when he just came into the Bull squad, it's almost you have to work hard to get into it. And that's something I learned from a John Smith, where he was just open to every single player in his team. And he wanted to know more about every guy, because then he knows how to motivate them. Now, I like to tell the story about, Buckies. I would never be hard on Buckies. G himself, he didn't like to be, couldn't be. You had to motivate him in a positive way. But a Pedri, if Pedri gets to the field on a Monday, Vandenberg, I would say, did you drink Sunday? Where were you? How late did you get to bed? I mean, then a guy like Francois Hoogel, I mean, he had one game, he had the worst game of his life. And I went to him and said, Hoogel, what went on? He said, no, my new boots didn't arrive before the game. I said, but what was wrong with your old boots? He said, nothing, but I didn't look good, so I couldn't play well. And
Oh my
although
goodness.
I might think it's stupid, or what's wrong with you? For him, it was important. And then I knew before a game, I need to ask him, listen, are you looking good? Did you go wax your legs? Are you fine? You're looking great. Yeah, the hair is looking smart. But that's important for you. But if you don't know your players, and if you don't know all your players and how to get the best out of them, then you can't be a great captain. So it takes more than just worrying about yourself, especially if you're in a leadership. You need to know your players, need to know the people around you, because everyone's got different backgrounds, everyone is different, and you need to motivate them on a different way. And I mean, even with my kids now, same thing, same house, same parents, same genes, but they're not the same. You can't handle them the same. You need to motivate them differently. They can't be motivated the same.
It's super interesting, Victor, because quite often when you speak to world-class players and people who've been at the very, very best at what they've done, when they then finish playing and some of them then become coaches, they suddenly think, oh, I've got to be more concerned. I'm not just thinking about myself. I can't just be selfish anymore. I've got to think about all these different relationships. But it sounds like you were doing that already as a leader within the team, and you became very aware of that at quite a young age, which makes me think that it would be a natural transition for you to become a head coach somewhere, and move into that area of your life. Has that been something that you've wanted to do?
As a younger
Bring
man,
the Bulls family back.
No, so that was something that I always thought I would want to do. That was the plan. I mean, I was coaching straight out of when I retired. I got the opportunity to be forward coach with the Bulls. Then I mean, even when I came back and played, I was player coach, did the forwards and the attack while I was playing as well. And then as I retired, I got offered to stay on with the Bulls. At that stage, I didn't like what was happening at the Bulls, and they couldn't tell me who's going to be the director of rugby. The plan was actually for Frans Ludeker to become director of rugby. I was supposed to be head coach, and then they fired Frans, and everything went in different directions. And I said, no, I can't be a part of this. And then, actually, 3 years after that, they asked me to come back and be the director of rugby with the Bulls. But it's all about what you want to do. And I think for a long time in my career, rugby was everything. And if you want to be successful in rugby, it needs to be everything. And I think in those 2 years that I got away from rugby, there was something else that got more important for me. I loved spending time supporting my kids, being there for them, being there at matches. And I was just not ready to give that up. And I'm still not ready to give that up. So I love consulting. I love going over to Japan. And for those 2 weeks that I'm there, I'm 100% there. From the morning when I get up to the evening when I go to bed, it's just rugby. I'm in front of the laptop. I go through things. I work out plans. I chat to Eddie. We go through things and I can give my input. But if you're at home, and a lot of schools always ask me, even unions, and you go in for a day, then you go away, you go back the next week. And unfortunately, they don't see the things the same. They think they understand what you're saying, but you get back in 2 weeks and you're like, what you doing? No, but this is what you coach. This is not what I said, because they don't see the picture exactly like you see it. So I think if you want to coach, you need to put 100%. Gee, like when we played, we were 100%. We couldn't wait to get back to Loftus. I think you'll remember when I was injured, I was at every training. I didn't miss a training. I was there. Then I was with the coaches, helping them, tell them how things should work. So I think the day when I'm ready to get back to that, and that maybe that's in about 3-4 years' time, then I'll have a look at it. But at this stage of my career, it's just very difficult to see myself committing 100% all my time, all my energy back into rugby.
No, I completely understand that.
I can definitely relate with that. I was just this weekend back. We had a weekend off. Unfortunately, we didn't qualify for the semis in the Champions Cup, and I went back to Toulouse. My family's still in Toulouse. I'm here in La Rochelle. I talk about that a lot, and just you saying the rugby needs to like be everything if you go into it. And what I'm definitely picking up is that being away from home, I potentially go back every 3 or 4 weeks, and every time I go back, I'm spending time with my daughter, the small things. Like this weekend, we just went to the bakery, 20 minutes, spend time together before she goes to a cheerleading practice. It was pressured. It was only 20 minutes, but that 20 minutes for me, Matt, was everything. And,
Yeah.
a lot of people don't get that, whether we were players back in the day and now coaches, the sacrifices our family makes, our loved ones that support us. And I just want to take a hats off to you. I see you're very involved in your children's life, which is normal. But sometimes, we can get sidetracked because we get obsessed with our careers because we had this type of hunger and this compulsion and competitiveness when we were players. But Victor, you spoke about a lot of things. You spoke about leadership, you spoke about belief and getting to know your team, your teammates. Everything you've learned, has that helped you to transition after rugby? I know you got involved in a bit of businesses. So, you're not just a rugby player. You don't just got a good set of hair on you. If you can tell us more about what's Victor Matfield all about now after rugby?
Yes, okay. Can I just go back quickly to that sacrifice? So I know I shouldn't be coaching if I think I'm sacrificing something, because when I was a player, and my wife gets upset with me when I say it, I didn't sacrifice anything. For me at that stage, rugby was just so important. My family, my wife, everything around it had to fall in. It just didn't feel like I'm sacrificing, because that dream, that chase, that goal was so big. I never saw something as a sacrifice. I promise you. It's just, I need to do this. This is what's needed for rugby. And that's just what I did. Everyone else I had to sacrifice, but in my mind, it's because I'm giving you and you're getting, this is what I need to do. So for me, it was never like I was sacrificing. This is what I need to do, and I'm going to do it. So I think if you start feeling is sacrifice, then it's always difficult, and that's why I'm not coaching. Into um, career, yes. Yeah, I was very fortunate. And again, I think it's the scariest few years when you just retire. I mean, you go from being a superstar, everyone looks up to you. I mean, you can walk into any room where they talk rugby and you can give your opinion and you can back your opinion. Then all of a sudden you go into the business world where you know nothing. But I was very fortunate. There's a guy, Louis van der Walt, one of the biggest property guys in South Africa, that gave me opportunity. There's a few of our guys that played with us that went to work for him. Johan Rucci retired early to went to work for him. Farida Pri and myself invested quite a bit of our money while we were playing with him as well. So he called me after I was done and said, "Listen, Victor, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I think coaching, but now I'm not that sure." He said, "So what do you think?" I said, I was actually joking. I said, "Louis, do you have something for me?" He said, "Of course I have something for you. Would you like to come join me?" I said, "Yes, but where?" And he said, "Well, we started this new company, Volkswinkel, that's doing game auctions." And I said, "Louis, okay, I can join you, but how are you going to use me? I know nothing about wild game and I know nothing about auctions." And he said, "Victor, I can tell you, with your leadership skills and with your network, you'll be an asset for the company." I said, "Okay, well, then I joined." I didn't even ask what he will pay me, nothing. I said, "Okay." So then I decided, that's why I went to Northampton quickly for 6 months just to get a little retirement policy going. I went there for 6 months just to cover those first few years going into. So then I went to Volkswinkel, going from a lot of money to almost earning nothing. Back then, got 30,000 rand. That's nothing. And so I arrived at this thing, and the CEO said, "I heard Louis said you must join us." I said, "Yes." what you want me to do? He said, he doesn't know, but just come sit in the boardroom with me, because he'd like to sit in the boardroom with the whole end this year. Just come sit here with me and just learn the business. So I sat there with him probably about 2-3 months. First auction came. I said, listen, Louis, what do you want me to do? He said, no, let's say when all the clients come, just say hello, talk to them. And as they come, they start talking to me. Then they wanted to start talking about the game. And I'm like, I don't know anything. I can't answer these guys. I looked back and I saw, okay, the youngsters in the company were starting to put out chairs for the auction in the hall. And I thought, nah, let me go do that. So I went there, started putting out chairs with the guys. And at that same time, Louis van der Walt arrives, then I had a look at it, and he didn't say nothing. And then on the Monday, he called me and said, Victor, what the hell were you doing putting out chairs? I said, Louis, I couldn't talk to these guys about game because I don't know anything. So I just had to do something. And he said for him, that was the biggest positive he ever saw. That a guy that just came from the World Cup didn't feel he was better than all the other guys and wouldn't do something like that. And I mean, so that was the start. Then they said, okay, we wanted to start a feed business. Victor, you're going to be CEO. Again, I said, I don't know anything about this. I said, listen, we've got the best, I think you call it a voedingskundige. What's a, Kathy, you must help me here.
I can't get this feeding technician specialist.
Feed technician, yeah, a feed technician. And we've got the best marketers that know all the people. You just need to manage this. And I said, okay. Started doing it. Again, a lot of hard work. We were in the car, driving around, seeing all the clients. And within 2 years, the feed business did better than the auction business. So it really went well. And again, just managing people, knowing people, almost back to knowing your people you're working with, knowing your clients, knowing what they want, how to keep them happy. And I mean, using the knowledge around you, not thinking you know everything. So that went very well. And then actually when the Bulls asked me to become head coach as well, Louis heard about it, and then he called me and said, listen, but I think it's time now for me to become CEO of the whole group. And that made it very difficult. So then I was like, okay, I always wanted to be head coach of the Bulls. Now I get a great opportunity in the corporate world, and I can be with my family. And then I tried to say, the Bulls said, okay, I'll be director, but I don't want to do Currie Cup so that I could have, and they didn't want to give me that clause. And then I went back to Louis and said, okay, I'm going to take the CEO job. Then the Bulls came back and said, okay, you can have that clause as well. I said, no, I've signed already. So it was touch and go if I was back. But yeah, then I was out of it. And yeah, I think again, going into something, and it's just managing people, understanding, firstly, work hard. Now you need to work hard. You need to get in there, put in the hard work, and to understand the business. Then knowing your client, knowing your people working for you, and getting the best out of them, and giving them the opportunity and empower them to lift themselves out.
You know, Matty, just listening to you, I think, you know, that was one of your biggest strengths, having an ability to bring the best out of everyone. You know, you mentioned there as well, you know, how you spoke with certain players. And remember with me, you wouldn't need to be too negative. You just said like, hey, gee, you need to do better. You know, you just had this way about things. But it's also because you took the time to get to know everyone, the time you spent with everyone. And, you know, I can definitely say this. Maybe back then there was a time that you were flash, but I can tell you this, you were humble, and you still are. And just taking the time to chat with us. And I'm really enjoying this. And I know we need to have a hard stop soon. And what I'm enjoying about this pod, everybody speaks about the World Cup and everything else. But what you shared tonight is just, it's so unbelievably important. You know, that foundation, the belief, the humility, willing to put the chairs away. So that's just unbelievable. But I know, Ben, you got a few more questions before we get on to our last one. So is there anything else you would like to ask me?
I've lost track of time because we haven't even spoken about the Springboks. And as I want to know what that 10-year-old Victor Matfield, I think in Polokwane and Petersburg, you know, what did that boy think he was going to become a Springbok?
I grew up in a house that sport was everything. My dad was a schoolmaster. My mom was a teacher, so and I grew up in where my dad was schoolmaster at a hostel. So from a 3, 4 year old, I was always out with the hostel boys playing rugby, playing cricket. I always told the guys I never wanted any toys. I just wanted rugby balls or a tennis racket or a cricket ball. That's all I wanted ever as a gift for a birthday. So I grew up with sport, loved it. I think my dad and my mum always installed that hard work in me. As a youngster, I loved cricket as well. So I remember holidays, I'll be in the nets for 5 hours. Luckily, my dad could use the school's bowling machine, so I could be in that net for hours. My dad feeding the bowling machine. And then friends will come over and I'll be bowling, playing together. So just loving sport. And yeah, you never knew. You were always hoping. I think all kids in South Africa dream about it. I think these days, school sport is so professional. All these guys really think they're going to be professionals when they're 15, 16. We were hoping, and but my parents still said, listen, you need to go to varsity to get an education because so I went to Tuks to go study actually, and then the rugby started to go well, and yeah, so always had that dream. Always had the passion for sport. Sport was always my life, my whole life. I didn't have anything else, especially at school. It was studying and doing sport. Yeah, and then went to varsity. Luckily, things started happening, and again, got a coach at under 21 level that backed me. I think while most of the guys that played SA schools were on the SA under 19 tour, I started playing for the Bulls under 21, and that coach just kept picking me. And yeah, that gave me a lot of opportunities.
Is that when you first thought it was going to be a reality?
Yeah, I think so. I think in matric things happened a little bit. I played SA Academy, played few provincial teams and stuff. And then I got a small contract with the Bulls and I got a bursary at Tuks. So then you thought maybe there's opportunity to do something. And then I'll say probably my second year, I got picked for SA under 21 as a 20-year-old. And then, yeah, from there, things happened pretty quickly. But again, I had to go to Griquas. I went like one of these superstar kids that played out of under 20 for the Bulls. I had to go to a smaller union to get opportunity to play. And yeah, that's where Sway's the brain was. He gave me opportunities to run the line out. That changed a lot about how I played the game. And yeah, I became a Springbok out of Griquas.
Yeah, Victor, if you don't mind, I want to ask you specifically about that because I was thinking from the outside, it looks like you took a deliberate step to go to a smaller place. Maybe people would say that's a backward step, but you backed yourself. I mean, was that about backing yourself so that you knew that you would give yourself the best chance to go forward because you would play regularly? That's a brave, courageous thing to do, you know. And was it because Swace had belief in you, or what? Because I think there's a lot of lessons in that for people.
I think there was two things that was important for me. So I think the first thing was at that stage, Krainer Otto, who was the number one Springbok lock, was the number 1 5 lock at the Bulls. So I was underneath him. And then at the end, I was playing SA under 21. The coach that was there, one of the other locks got injured and they didn't pick me for the Currie Cup semi-final finals. I just had a thought they don't have the believe in me. And remember, I was a little bit of a different player. I was a bit looser than the normal lock back then, because back then you weren't allowed to stand in between the centers where everyone is standing these days. And I was standing there. So they didn't like the way I was played. And so first for me, I wanted to play. And I didn't want to sit on a bench or not even or play club rugby while I can play in a Currie Cup. And then, so that was the first thing. And the second thing was Swayze the Brain calling me and believing in me and telling me the I think he's got of me. And I think back then, people would say, but actually the Greek was in it first on the lock the previous year. So they had a fantastic team as well. So it was a smaller union, but they in it first in the pool stages. Unfortunately, they lost in the semi-final. So they had a great team as well. And they had this great coach that believed in me. And he said, listen, come, you're going to be my first choice. I'm going to back you and you're going to play. And I wanted to play and show what I could do.
I love that. Gee, I love that. Backing yourself, and just that we get asked by young players, don't we? And sometimes there comes a stage where you just have to back yourself. But when you have someone who puts faith in you as well, it's pretty powerful, isn't it? It gives you a lot of confidence.
No, I totally agree with you there, Ben. Now, Matthew, you've taken a lot of time with us tonight. I really do appreciate it. I want to sneak in one more question before Ben gives us the closing question. British and Irish Lions coming up. Is there any tips you can give the Aussies on how to tame the lion?
That's going to be big, huh? I think Joe Schmidt might have a few plans for them. And hopefully they pick a lot of the Irish guys, because it doesn't look like they want to win big games. Semi-finals, World Cup, I don't know if they can win it. So I think Joe Schmidt got a plan for them.
Okay.
Awesome. Hey, Victor, thanks for your time. It's been awesome having you on. We could go on for hours. I know you've got to get away, but the one question we'd love to know is and you've addressed some of this already, but what's the one big lesson that you've taken from the game that you use in your life now, post-rugby?
It can never just be one. So I always say you need to have a dream. You need to have a goal. There must be something that you wake up in the morning that you need to chase. So if that's there, then you need to work harder than anyone else to achieve that. And I believe it. I never had the talent. There's plenty more players out there with a lot more talent than I had. But I know I worked harder than any other player. I watched more videos. I was fitter than any other lock. And that's why I could play so many tests, because I just worked harder. I outworked everyone else. And in the business world, it's the same. If you've got that dream, if you know what you want to achieve, where you want to be, and you work your ass off to get there, you will achieve it.
Amazing.
No, great stuff. No, Matty, thanks for that. That definitely rubbed off on me as well. When I was still playing prop back then, I wanted to run with the centers, myself and Jaco Engels, on those 100-meter sprints. Yeah. But Matty, thanks for taking the time to join us tonight on our podcast. Really do appreciate it. And much blessings to you and your family. And it's great to see your girls growing up. Good luck. All right, you can have your handful. Good luck. I'm getting getting a lot of flack my side here as well. My eldest, 20 years old. But all of the best with everything, all your ventures, being a CEO. Maybe one day you'll have your own podcast, Diary of the CEO. Matty. All right. So, but yeah, thanks for taking the time. And for everyone that's listening, please give our show a follow. Help us to grow our show so we can have some great guests like Victor on as well. And, thanks for your support. Matty, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
All right. It's nice to catch up, man.